think about ours. Take a little break for refreshment. But this goes in a slightly different direction as well. Not only is this study of the regime, as we've seen, as I've just tried to indicate, rooted in many ways, the practical experience of the thinkers we'll be looking at, but the study of regime politics, either implicitly or explicitly, raises a question that goes beyond the boundary of any given society. A regime, as I've said, constitutes a people's way of life, what they believe makes their life worth living, or to put it again slightly different, what a people stand for. Although we are most familiar with the character of a modern democratic regime, such as ours, the study of political philosophy is in many ways a kind of immersion into what we might call today comparative politics. That is to say, it opens up to us the variety of regimes, each with its own distinctive set of claims or principles, each vying and potentially in conflict with all the others, okay? Underlying this cacophony of regimes is the question, always, which of these regimes is best? What has or ought to have a claim on our loyalty and rational consent? Political philosophy is always guided by the question of the best regime. But what is the best regime? Even to raise such a question seems to pose insuperable obstacles. Isn't that a completely subjective judgment, what one thinks is the best regime? How could one begin such a study? Is the best regime, as the ancients tended to believe, Plato, Aristotle, and others, is it an aristocratic republic in which only the few best habitually rule? Or is the best regime, as the moderns believe, a democratic republic where in principle political office is open to all by virtue of their membership in society alone? Will the best regime be a small, closed society that through generations has made a supreme sacrifice towards self-perfection? Think of that. Or will the best regime be a large cosmopolitan order embracing all human beings, perhaps even a kind of universal League of Nations consisting of all free and equal men and women? Whatever form the best regime takes, however, it will always favor a certain kind of human being with a certain set of character traits. Is that type the common man, as found in democracies? Those of acquired taste and money, as in aristocracies? The warrior, or even the priest, as in theocracies? No question that I can think of can be more fundamental. And this finally raises the question of the relation between the best regime, or the good regime, and what we could say are actually existing regimes, regimes that we are all familiar with. What function does the best regime play in political science? How does it guide our actions here and now? This issue received a kind of classic formulation in Aristotle's distinction of what he called the good human being and the good citizen. For the good citizen, we'll read this chapter later on in the Politics, for the good citizen, you could say, patriotism is enough. To uphold and defend the laws of your own country simply because they are your own is both necessary and sufficient. Such a view of citizen virtue runs into the obvious objection that the good citizen of one regime will be at odds with the good citizen of another. A good citizen of contemporary Iran will not be the same as the good citizen of contemporary America. But the good citizen, Aristotle goes on to say, is not the same as the good human being, right? Well, the good citizen is relative to the regime. You might say regime specific. The good human being, so he believes, is good everywhere. The good human being loves what is good simply, not because it is his own, but because it is good. Some sense of this was demonstrated in Abraham Lincoln's judgment about Henry Clay, an early idol of Lincoln's. Lincoln wrote of Clay, he loved his country, he said, partly because it was his own country, but mainly because it was a free country. His point, I think, is that Clay exhibited, at least on Lincoln's telling, something of the philosopher. What he loved was an idea, the idea of freedom. That idea was not the property of one particular country, but it was constitutive of any good society. The good human being, it would seem, would be a philosopher, or at least would have something philosophical about him or her, and who may only be fully at home in the best regime. But of course, the best regime lacks actuality. We all know that. It has never existed. The best regime embodies a supreme paradox, it would seem. It is superior, in some ways, to all actual regimes, but it has no concrete existence anywhere. This makes it difficult, you could say, and this is Aristotle's point, I think, this makes it difficult for the philosopher to be a good citizen of any actual regime. Philosophy will never feel fully or truly at home in any particular society. The philosopher can never be truly loyal to anyone or anything but what is best. Think of that. Raises a question about issues of love, loyalty, and friendship. This tension, of course, between the best regime and any actual regime is the space that makes political philosophy possible. In the best regime, if we were to inhabit such, political philosophy would be unnecessary or redundant. It would wither away. Political philosophy exists and only exists in that, call it, zone of indeterminacy between the is and the ought, between the actual and the ideal. This is why political philosophy is always and necessarily a potentially disturbing undertaking. Those who embark on the quest for knowledge of the best regime may not return the same people that they were before. You may return with very different loyalties and allegiances than you had in the beginning. But there is some compensation for this, I think. The ancients had a beautiful word, or at least the Greeks had a beautiful word for this quest, for this desire for knowledge of the best regime. They called it eros, or love. Right? The quest for knowledge of the best regime must necessarily be accompanied, sustained, and elevated by eros. You may not have realized it when you walked into this class today, but the study of political philosophy may be the highest tribute we pay to love. Think of that. And while you're thinking about it, you can start reading Plato's Apology for Socrates, which we'll discuss for class on Wednesday. Okay? It's nice to see you back. And have a very good but thoughtful September 11th.